Good evening, all. Right. The best way I can describe the current situation with Brexit is that we're in a three-way gunfight, kind of like in the film The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, when they have that sort of triangle standoff, and they're both looking at the other two options and wondering who's going to kill who off first. And that's what we've got essentially with the three options of Remain, of Theresa May's deal, and of no deal. And if you think there are any other options, then there aren't really, because if you think there's a Canada style deal waiting or a Norway style deal waiting, they've all got one feature in common with Theresa May's deal, and that's that they have to have a backstop, an Irish backstop, if the EU was going to sign off on it. So that's why you're essentially forced into three scenarios. One is Remain, ditching Brexit. Another is letting the clock run out and crashing out. And another is taking a deal, whether Theresa May's deal or a slight modification of it, that basically is agreed by the EU to have the backstop for a period of time in which we complete the rest of the negotiations to wherever we're going to go. Okay, so those are the three ones, having a sort of three-way fight. So what are their strengths and weaknesses, and what should we do as essentially the Remain, like cowboy, looking at the other two? How should we play it? As far as the no deal entity is concerned, their advantage is that they are the technical default. So it's kind of written into our legislation that we're going to leave on that date, the 29th of March 2019. And if the deal doesn't come through or get signed off, they are technically the default. So that is their strength. Their weakness is that politically, there's a massive barrier to them. Politically, they're not the default. Politically, if we get to the night before that crash out happens, our parliamentarians are going to go, no, we'd rather sign off on the deal and put our country into quarantine in order to avoid that scenario. So that's the no deal. With Theresa May, her strength is that she's got a deal now on the table, largely agreed by the EU. Okay, we'll see what happens with the Gibraltar thing. And the thing is, she can keep bringing that back again and again and again and again. And so politically making herself the default option. Her weakness is that no one bloody likes her deal. It is widely acknowledged that this is the worst of all worlds, in that it doesn't satisfy the Remainers, because this is just like staying in the EU but losing all your voice on it. It doesn't satisfy the Brexiteers that want to go diving off into deregulation and free trade already. And it's got a popularity of about 15% at the moment, and it's not likely to pick up much. So her strength is that politically within Westminster, mechanically, she can force it to be a bit of a default, but in terms of popularity, it is the least popular of all options. Now, on to Remain. The strength that we have is in any three-way vote, whether it be sort of from the parliamentarians or from the public, then Remain will beat the other two options in a three-way in terms of popularity, in terms of what people think is sensible. The weakness that we have is to pragmatically get to a situation where you've got people's vote and then Remain as an option, and then voting for Remain takes some parliamentary hoop jumping in mechanics and things lining up just at the right time. So there's a bit of a rocky road to it. That's our weakness. Okay, so how should different people play, or how are they trying to play these different strategies? Starting with no deal, who should they be looking to take down? Remain or Theresa May's deal? Well, the more they talk about Remain, the more they'd be giving succor to it as an actual option and opportunity. And they know from the polling it's relatively popular. So they kind of want to deny that Remain exists. And they've been gunning hard for Theresa's no deal Brexit. In fact, a lot of them have been saying this deal is worse than even remaining, as if they're some kind of put down. That's actually quite helpful. So their targets are largely trained on Theresa May's deal. Now, take Theresa May's deal. What's the main target of that entity, that cowboy, that person? Well, they're looking at Remain, and they're looking at the no deal scenario. And again, they don't want to give too much succor to Remain here, because they've only got leverage on that with a little bit of ERGs threatening that it could be Remain. And then they'd have to admit that it exists. So they've largely got their guns trained on no deal, because the more they can talk up the dangers of no deal, the greater likelihood they have to scare the CBI into supporting them, to scare the EEF into supporting them, to scare some of those moderate centrist Labour people into scaring them, to just avoid no deal scenario and back them. So what should we do as essentially the Remain cowboy with our guns and our holsters here looking at the other two? If we go and take out the deal immediately and just focus on the deal, then we run the risk of blowing that up and having a default path to a no-deal Brexit, with Theresa May really always reinvigorating the other option of kind of like her deal, but in slightly different formats. If we're totally focused on no deal and we sing up the horrors of no deal, then we risk chasing some of those Labour MPs and the CBI and others into supporting Theresa May's deal just for a quiet life. Our best bet at the moment is to take a subtle sort of dual strategy of, firstly, and this all goes through writing letters to the MPs, getting everyone to say, how does this deal compare to Remain? How does this deal compare to Remain? Really hammering that in, because everybody admits this deal is weaker than Remain in terms of keeps us in the same systems, but doesn't give us a voice. Whereas at the same time, trying to line up and get our parliamentarians to line up and declare that they would never actually back a no deal and they would rather sign off on the actual deal at the last minute, the 11th hour, rather than back a no deal. So no deal just ain't going to happen. And so the real choice, because of that wall, because of that barrier, is between this deal and the deal that we've developed over the last 40 years. The more you say no deal is not an option, Parliament won't pass that. They think it's crazy. That is not an option. The choices are this deal that's just being cooked up, or the deal that we have developed with our partners in the European Union over the last 40 years with all the bells and whistles and opt-outs. That's the choice. That's the choice. And the more we're loud about that, and that being the dynamic, the more we grow our support base, and the more we grow our support in public and the Parliament, the more it just becomes illegitimate for us never to be given that choice. So that's kind of how we have to play it at the moment. But I thought that would be an entertaining overview for you at the moment. As to other options about general election, well, it doesn't look like that's going to happen, but if it did, then we open up a new scenario. Another option would be, do we get more time in order to renegotiate the deal? EU pretty much says no. So at the moment, the three clear options that have got legs and that are overtly sort of fighting out in the public space are those three. The current deal, which is basically any deal that you negotiate is going to have some kind of backstop, that's May's deal, versus crashing out saying, you know, sod it, we want to go hard, we want to go now, and Remain, which is kind of like, thanks for the experiment, guys, but it's been a waste of our time. Let's stick with where we are and be a nice, responsible country wanting to engage with all of our neighbours and building up a better, stronger Europe now that we've had 2.5 years of education. Cool.